What if the person pulling away from you isn't losing feelings at all? What if the distance, the mixed signals, and the emotional walls are actually signs of something much deeper? Many people assume that when someone avoids closeness, it means they don't care. But sometimes the exact opposite is true. Sometimes the strongest fear appears when feelings become real. When love starts demanding vulnerability, trust, and emotional exposure, fear can take control. In this video, we're going to explore 6 powerful signs that an avoidant person may be scared to love you. Not because they don't feel anything, but because what they feel may be stronger than they're prepared to handle. Let's begin. There is something deeply confusing about being close to someone one moment and then feeling them drift away the next. Everything seems to be going well. The conversations are meaningful, the connection feels genuine, and there is a growing sense of trust between two people. Then, without warning, the energy changes. Messages become shorter. Communication slows down. The warmth that was once present suddenly feels distant. For many people, this shift immediately creates anxiety because it appears as though something has gone wrong. But in some cases, the distance is not caused by a lack of feelings. It can actually be triggered by the exact opposite. When emotional intimacy starts to develop, something powerful begins to happen. The relationship moves beyond casual interaction and enters a space where vulnerability becomes necessary. Feelings become real. Expectations start to form. The possibility of loss, rejection, or heartbreak becomes more visible. While many people naturally move closer during this stage, someone who fears emotional dependence may experience an entirely different reaction. The closer they feel to another person, the more exposed they become. Suddenly, they are no longer dealing with a simple connection. They are dealing with the possibility of needing someone, caring deeply about someone, and being emotionally affected by another person's actions. For an individual who has spent years protecting themselves from emotional vulnerability, this can feel overwhelming. As a result, a strange pattern often emerges. Just when the connection seems to be growing stronger, they begin creating distance. They may become less available. They may focus intensely on work, hobbies, or personal responsibilities. They may appear distracted or emotionally detached. To the other person, it feels confusing because the withdrawal seems completely disconnected from what was happening in the relationship. What makes this dynamic difficult to understand is that the distance is often not planned. It is usually an automatic response to emotional discomfort. Deep inside, there is a desire for connection, but there is also a fear of what that connection means. The more attached they become, the more they risk getting hurt. The more they care, the more vulnerable they feel. Creating space becomes a way to reduce that anxiety. This is why moments of closeness can sometimes be followed by moments of withdrawal. A heartfelt conversation, a meaningful compliment, a shared emotional experience, or even realizing how important someone has become can trigger feelings that are difficult for them to process. Instead of leaning further into those emotions, they instinctively step back to regain a sense of emotional control. The important thing to understand is that distance alone does not automatically reveal what someone feels. While withdrawal can sometimes indicate a loss of interest, it can also signal an internal struggle that has nothing to do with a lack of affection. In fact, some people become most distant precisely when their feelings are becoming strongest. That is what makes this pattern so confusing. The very closeness they secretly desire can also be the thing that frightens them the most. And until they learn to face that fear, they may continue moving back and forth between connection and distance, wanting love while simultaneously feeling afraid of everything that love requires. One of the most misunderstood aspects of an avoidant person's behavior is the difference between what they feel and what they are willing to express. Many people assume that if someone truly cares, they will naturally talk about their emotions, openly share their feelings, and consistently communicate their affection. But for some individuals, emotions are not something that comes easily into words. In fact, the stronger their feelings become, the harder it may be for them to express them directly. This creates a situation that can be incredibly confusing for the people around them. On the surface, they may appear emotionally reserved. They rarely talk about how much someone means to them. They may avoid romantic conversations, struggle to give reassurance, or seem uncomfortable when discussions become deeply emotional. Because of this, others often conclude that the connection is not important to them. Yet beneath that quiet exterior, there may be far more emotional investment than anyone realizes. Instead of expressing care through words, they often reveal it through observation and actions. They notice details that most people overlook. They remember things that were mentioned weeks or even months ago. They pay attention to preferences, habits, fears, and goals. While they may not openly say, "I care about you," their behavior often shows that they are listening far more closely than they let on. You might mention a stressful situation once and later discover that they remembered every detail. You might casually talk about something important to you, only to realize they never forgot it. These small moments can seem insignificant at first, but they often reveal a level of attention that goes beyond simple friendliness. People rarely invest that much mental and emotional energy into someone they genuinely do not care about. Another reason this can be difficult to recognize is that avoidant individuals often feel safer showing affection indirectly. Direct emotional expression can make them feel exposed. It requires vulnerability, and vulnerability can trigger fears they have spent years trying to avoid. Actions, on the other hand, feel safer. Helping solve a problem, checking in unexpectedly, remembering something important, or quietly supporting someone from the background can feel less risky than openly discussing emotions. The challenge is that these expressions of care are often inconsistent. One day they may seem thoughtful, attentive, and emotionally invested. The next day they may appear distant and difficult to read. This inconsistency is not always a reflection of changing feelings. More often it reflects an internal conflict between wanting connection and wanting protection. Part of them wants to move closer. Part of them worries about what will happen if they become too attached. As these competing desires pull in opposite directions, their behavior can seem contradictory. They may do things that clearly demonstrate affection while simultaneously avoiding conversations about that affection. They may make someone feel important while struggling to admit that importance out loud. What makes this especially significant is that genuine care often reveals itself in moments when there is nothing to gain. The small acts of consideration, the attention to details, the concern for someone's well-being, and the quiet efforts to remain connected all point toward an emotional investment that words may never fully capture. Sometimes the loudest feelings are not expressed through dramatic declarations. Sometimes they exist in the little things that happen consistently behind the scenes. And for a person who struggles with emotional vulnerability, those quiet actions can reveal far more than their words ever will. For many people, love is associated with comfort, support, and companionship. The closer they become to someone, the safer and more secure they feel. But for an avoidant person, intimacy can trigger a very different emotional experience. Instead of immediately feeling comforted by closeness, they may begin worrying about what they could lose in the process. One of their deepest fears is not always rejection or heartbreak. Often, it is the fear of losing their independence. Independence is more than just a preference for them. It is often a source of emotional security. They take pride in handling problems on their own, making their own decisions, and relying primarily on themselves. Over time, this self-sufficiency becomes part of their identity. It is what makes them feel safe, stable, and in control of their lives. When a relationship starts becoming serious, however, new emotions begin to emerge. They start thinking about another person more often. They begin considering someone else's needs, feelings, and expectations. Their daily routines slowly adjust to include another person. While this process may feel natural to many people, it can feel unsettling to someone who highly values emotional independence. Deep down, they may begin asking themselves questions they never voiced before. What if I become too dependent on this person? What if I lose the freedom I've worked so hard to maintain? What if this relationship changes who I am? What if I need someone more than I want to? These fears are not necessarily logical, but they feel very real. The stronger the emotional connection becomes, the more these concerns start occupying their mind. They may genuinely enjoy being close to someone while simultaneously feeling nervous about how much space that person is beginning to occupy in their emotional world. This creates a painful internal conflict. One part of them wants intimacy, connection, and love. Another part wants to protect their sense of freedom and self-reliance. Because both desires exist at the same time, their behavior can appear confusing and inconsistent. There may be moments when they seem fully invested in the relationship. They initiate conversations, make plans, and show genuine interest. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, they become distant. They need more space. They focus on work, personal goals, hobbies, or anything that helps them reconnect with their sense of independence. To the other person, this sudden shift can feel personal. It may seem as though the relationship itself is causing the withdrawal. In reality, the avoidant individual is often responding to their own internal fears rather than anything their partner has done wrong. What makes this situation particularly difficult is that they often don't fully understand these fears themselves. They may simply feel overwhelmed without being able to explain why. The growing emotional attachment creates discomfort, and their instinct is to create distance in order to regain a sense of balance and control. Ironically, this fear tends to appear strongest when the relationship is becoming meaningful. Casual connections rarely trigger the same level of anxiety because there is little emotional risk involved. But when someone becomes truly important, the possibility of emotional dependence becomes real. That is when the fear of losing independence often surfaces. The truth is that healthy love does not require someone to lose themselves. A strong relationship allows two individuals to remain complete people while building a meaningful connection together. Yet for someone who fears vulnerability, this lesson can take time to learn. Until they understand that love and independence can coexist, they may continue experiencing a push and pull dynamic. They move toward connection because they desire it, then retreat because they fear what it might cost them. And from the outside, what looks like uncertainty is often a struggle between the desire to love and the fear of losing the freedom that has always made them feel safe. For most people, emotional vulnerability is one of the foundations of a deep and meaningful relationship. It is the process of allowing another person to see thoughts, fears, insecurities, hopes, and emotions that are normally kept hidden from the rest of the world. Vulnerability creates trust, strengthens connection, and allows two people to build genuine intimacy. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, vulnerability can feel far less comforting than it does for others. In fact, it can feel deeply uncomfortable, intimidating, and even threatening. The reason for this is simple but powerful. Vulnerability requires risk. The moment someone opens their heart, they also open themselves to disappointment, rejection, criticism, and emotional pain. While most people understand this risk and accept it as part of building relationships, avoidant individuals often become highly focused on the potential danger rather than the potential reward. As a result, they learn to protect themselves by keeping certain emotional walls in place. These walls are not always obvious. They may still enjoy spending time with others, engaging in conversations, and forming connections. However, when discussions begin moving into deeply personal territory, something changes. They may become uncomfortable, change the subject, make a joke, or shift the focus away from themselves. This can create the impression that they do not have strong emotions. In reality, the opposite is often true. Many avoidant people experience emotions just as intensely as anyone else. The difference is that they have difficulty sharing those emotions openly. Expressing them feels risky because it removes the protective distance they rely on to feel safe. One of the most confusing aspects of this behavior is that the people who matter the most often trigger the strongest fear. When a relationship remains casual, emotional exposure feels limited. There is little at stake. But as feelings deepen, the importance of the relationship grows. Suddenly, the possibility of being hurt becomes more significant. The more someone means to them, the more vulnerable they become. The more vulnerable they become, the stronger their protective instincts often grow. This creates a frustrating paradox. They may deeply care about someone and desperately want emotional closeness, yet struggle to participate in the very conversations that create that closeness. They may listen attentively to another person's feelings but hesitate to share their own. They may crave understanding while finding it difficult to reveal what is happening inside them. Sometimes this struggle appears as emotional silence. Other times it appears as avoidance of serious conversations. When discussions become focused on feelings, future plans, fears, or relationship needs, they may suddenly seem uncomfortable or withdrawn. They are not necessarily rejecting the conversation itself. Often they are reacting to the emotional exposure the conversation requires. There is also a strong desire for control involved in this process. Vulnerability means entering a situation where outcomes cannot be fully controlled. Once emotions are shared, another person's response becomes unpredictable. For someone who values emotional self-protection, that uncertainty can feel overwhelming. Yet despite these fears, vulnerability remains something they often long for. Beneath the hesitation is usually a desire to be understood, accepted, and loved without judgment. The challenge is that their fear of emotional exposure frequently stands in the way of achieving that connection. That is why emotional vulnerability can be such a difficult battle for an avoidant person. They are not simply deciding whether to share their feelings. They are deciding whether to lower defenses that may have protected them for years. And when someone becomes truly important to them, that decision feels more significant than ever. The deeper the feelings, the greater the risk seems to be, which is why opening up can become one of the hardest and most meaningful steps they ever take. Trust does not come easily for everyone. While some people naturally open up and form emotional bonds relatively quickly, others approach relationships with far more caution. For an avoidant person, trust is rarely given freely. Instead, it is something that develops slowly through observation, consistency, and repeated evidence that a relationship is emotionally safe. Before allowing themselves to become fully attached, they often spend a great deal of time assessing whether the connection can truly be trusted. This process is not always obvious to the people around them. On the surface, it may appear as hesitation, uncertainty, or emotional distance. But beneath that behavior is often a quiet evaluation taking place. They are paying attention to how someone reacts under pressure, how they handle disagreements, and whether their words consistently match their actions. While others may be focusing on the excitement of a growing relationship, the avoidant individual is often focused on determining whether the relationship feels safe enough to invest in emotionally. One reason for this caution is that emotional vulnerability feels extremely risky to them. Opening up means lowering defenses that may have been in place for years. It means allowing another person access to parts of themselves they normally keep protected. Because of this, they do not simply look for attraction or chemistry. They look for signs of emotional security. They may pay close attention to how someone responds when boundaries are set. If they need time alone, do they receive understanding or pressure? If they express discomfort, are their feelings respected or dismissed? These moments can carry enormous weight because they reveal whether the relationship feels emotionally safe or emotionally demanding. Another area they often observe is conflict. Every relationship experiences disagreements, but for an avoidant person, conflict can become a powerful test of trust. They want to know whether problems can be discussed without turning into personal attacks, emotional manipulation, or overwhelming drama. If disagreements consistently feel safe and respectful, their confidence in the relationship slowly grows. If conflict feels unpredictable or hostile, their defenses often become stronger. Consistency is another factor they value deeply. They pay attention to whether someone shows up when they say they will, whether promises are kept, and whether behavior remains stable over time. Grand gestures may be appreciated, but consistency often carries far more significance. Predictable and reliable behavior creates a sense of safety that allows trust to develop gradually. This careful observation can sometimes be misunderstood as emotional unavailability. Others may feel frustrated by the slow pace or wonder why the relationship is not progressing more quickly. What they often do not realize is that the avoidant person may already be investing emotionally in their own way. They are simply trying to reduce uncertainty before allowing themselves to become fully vulnerable. In some situations, this behavior may even look like testing. They may pull back slightly to see how someone reacts. They may become quieter and observe whether the other person responds with patience or pressure. These actions are not always conscious or intentional. Often they stem from a deep desire to confirm that the relationship can handle challenges without becoming emotionally unsafe. At the heart of this behavior is not a desire to control others, but a desire to protect themselves. They want reassurance that emotional closeness will not lead to pain, rejection, or loss of control. They want evidence that the relationship can survive difficult moments without becoming threatening or unstable. Over time, if they consistently experience respect, understanding, and emotional reliability, their walls may begin to lower. Trust starts replacing fear. The need for constant evaluation becomes less intense. And little by little, they allow themselves to believe that connection does not always lead to danger. For an avoidant person, this journey toward trust is rarely fast. It is built through countless small experiences that prove the relationship is safe. And when that sense of safety finally takes root, it often becomes the foundation for a much deeper and more meaningful emotional connection. One of the most confusing experiences in a relationship is when someone creates physical or emotional distance, yet somehow never seems to completely let go. Their communication may become less frequent. They may need space, spend more time alone, or temporarily withdraw from emotional conversations. On the surface, it can appear as though they are losing interest or moving away from the connection entirely. However, with an avoidant person, distance does not always mean emotional disconnection. In many cases, they remain far more emotionally attached than their behavior suggests. This is what makes their actions so difficult to interpret. Most people naturally assume that closeness equals care and distance equals indifference. But avoidant individuals often operate differently. They can be emotionally invested in someone while simultaneously struggling with the intensity of those emotions. Instead of expressing their feelings openly, they may retreat into solitude and process those emotions privately. During these periods of withdrawal, they are often not forgetting about the person they care about. In fact, they may be thinking about them more than ever. The challenge is that the growing emotional attachment can feel overwhelming. Rather than moving closer when emotions become intense, they instinctively create space to manage what they are feeling internally. What is interesting is that even while they are distant, signs of emotional connection often remain. They continue paying attention. They remember important events, milestones, and conversations. They may quietly check in from time to time or show subtle signs that they are still aware of what is happening in the other person's life. Their involvement may not be as visible or obvious as others expect, but it often has not disappeared. This behavior can leave the other person feeling trapped in uncertainty. If they care, why are they pulling away? If they need space, why do they still seem emotionally connected? The answer often lies in the internal conflict avoidant individuals experience. They want connection, but they also fear the vulnerability that comes with it. They care deeply, but they struggle with the emotional exposure that deep caring creates. For them, distance can serve as a coping mechanism. It becomes a way to regulate emotions that feel difficult to handle. Instead of confronting those feelings directly, they step back and attempt to regain a sense of emotional balance. This withdrawal is often less about the other person and more about managing their own internal discomfort. The deeper the connection becomes, the more likely this pattern can emerge. Strong feelings create stronger vulnerability. Stronger vulnerability creates stronger fear. As a result, periods of closeness may be followed by periods of withdrawal. To an outside observer, this can look inconsistent or contradictory. Internally, however, it often feels like a struggle between desire and fear. Another important thing to understand is that avoidant individuals are not always fully aware of what is happening within them. They may recognize that they need space without fully understanding why. They may feel emotionally overwhelmed without having the language to explain those feelings. Because of this, their actions can appear confusing even to themselves. What makes this dynamic particularly significant is that complete emotional detachment usually looks very different. When someone genuinely no longer cares, their attention gradually fades, their curiosity disappears, their emotional investment decreases. With an avoidant person who remains emotionally connected, those signs often continue to exist beneath the surface despite the distance. This is why withdrawal should not always be interpreted as a lack of feeling. Sometimes it reflects an inability to comfortably handle those feelings. The distance may be visible, but the emotional connection remains present in ways that are harder to see. Beneath the silence, the space, and the temporary retreat, there may still be genuine care, attachment, and affection that has never truly disappeared. The challenge is that their fear of vulnerability often makes those emotions far more difficult to express than they are to experience.